You've given us quite the challenge this time. Macroeconomics.
Quite a bit to unpack.
Yeah, a lot to unpack.
Right.
Global economic engine actually runs.
It's like a cheat sheet for the global economy. We're going to sift through everything and bring you the most important principles, those core concepts that are going to help you make sense of, what you see in the news every day, what you hear people talking about, and more importantly, how those economic forces that seem so big and distant are actually impacting your day-to-day life.
Yeah, sometimes these things can feel so, overwhelming.
Right, absolutely.
Like, how does it affect me? Like, I'm just buying groceries,
Right. Sure.
But we'll get into that. First things first.
Right.
We need to kind of define, what are we even talking about when we say macroeconomics? Sounds very, macro.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's the study of the economy as a whole, essentially. So we're not looking at how a particular business is doing or how one person decides how they're going to spend their money. That's microeconomics. We're zooming way out, looking at the whole national economy or even the global economy, all those different forces at play.
Right. Kind of like that forest versus the trees idea.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
One of the sources mentioned that.
Yeah.
So we're zoomed out. We're looking at this big picture. What are we focused on when we talk about macroeconomics?
Well, we look at the major economic indicators, right? So things like a country's total income, how quickly prices are rising. We call that inflation. The overall pace of economic growth, is the economy expanding or is it shrinking? How many people are employed? How many people are out of work? And then, crucially, how government policies try to manage all of these different moving pieces.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding those big levers that drive the economic engine.
And how those levers, when they get pulled or pushed or whatever, how those actually end up affecting things like, as I said, my grocery bill or whether or not I have a job.
Absolutely. And it's all connected, right? One thing affects another. You pull one lever over here, something completely different might happen over there.
Right.
So, for example, if the government tries to boost economic growth, sometimes that can accidentally lead to higher inflation.
Unintended consequences.
Exactly. Unintended consequences. That's why understanding all these relationships and connections is so important.
Okay, so let's break down some of these big concepts a little bit, right? We hear about economic growth all the time. What does it really mean in this macroeconomic context? What are we actually measuring?
So economic growth, at its simplest, is just the increase in a country's production of goods and services over time.
Okay.
Are we making more things, providing more services? Is the overall economic pie getting bigger? That's what we're talking about.
And what are the key ingredients to make that pie bigger?
That's a great question. So our sources point to a few key drivers of economic growth. First, there's capital. That's the tools, machinery, the factories, all the things that we use to produce stuff. Then there's labor, the people doing the work, using their skills and knowledge to produce those goods and services. And of course, technology plays a huge role. New inventions, better ways of doing things, more efficient processes.
Yeah, making things faster, better, cheaper, all of that.
Exactly. And then there's this concept of productivity. And productivity is a little bit more abstract, but it's basically how much output we can get from each unit of input. So whether that's a worker or a machine. So imagine a factory that's able to produce more goods with the same number of workers. Right? Maybe they've implemented a more efficient workflow. They've found a way to optimize their processes. That's a productivity gain.
Makes sense. Doing more with less.
Precisely.
More efficient, yeah. Okay, so our pie is getting bigger. Now, one of the things that one of our sources mentioned is that we want growth to be inclusive and sustainable. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So while it's generally a good thing for an economy to grow, to expand, right? The quality of that growth matters a lot.
Okay.
So inclusive growth means that the benefits of that expansion, that bigger pie, are shared widely across society. Different income levels, different demographics, not just concentrated at the top, everyone's benefiting. Sustainable growth, on the other hand, means that we're achieving that growth without depleting our natural resources or doing damage to the environment that would harm future generations. It's thinking about the long term.
Right. So we want everyone to benefit. And we want to make sure that we're not, ruining the planet for our kids and grandkids in the process.
Exactly. It's about a more holistic, long-term view.
So we talked about growth, but the economy doesn't just go up, 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 up.
Unfortunately not.
It's got its ups and downs, kind of a natural rhythm to it, like boom and bust. And that's where this concept of the business cycle comes in.
Yeah, exactly. The business cycle describes those natural fluctuations in economic activity that most economies go through. Think of it like waves,
Yeah.
It's got its peaks and its troughs. So there's the expansion phase, the economy is growing, things are looking good, jobs are being created, businesses are investing, there's a sense of optimism. And eventually that growth reaches a peak, the highest point of economic activity.
And then what?
Well, as they say, what goes up must come down. So, inevitably, we enter a contraction phase. The economy starts to slow down. Maybe businesses cut back on production. People start to lose their jobs. There's less investment. And eventually, this contraction bottoms out at a trough, the lowest point of economic activity.
Okay.
And from there, hopefully, the cycle begins anew, a recovery starts, and we move back into an expansion phase.
So it's this constant sort of wave-like motion.
Yeah, exactly. It's cyclical. And understanding where an economy is in that cycle, whether it's expanding or contracting, is really important for businesses making investment decisions and for governments trying to implement policies to smooth out the ride a little bit, to avoid those really dramatic swings.
Right. So speaking of things that can kind of make the ride a little bumpy, two words that often pop up in the news and tend to make people a little nervous are inflation and stagflation.
Yeah, definitely not words you want to hear too often.
So let's unpack those a little bit.
Okay. So inflation basically is just a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over time. So put simply, your money buys less than it used to. That $10 bill in your wallet won't go as far next year if we've got high inflation.
Oh, so that's why my coffee keeps getting more expensive.
Exactly. Now, stagflation is a much trickier beast. It's basically this nasty combination of high inflation, high unemployment, and slow or stagnant economic growth. It's a sign that something's really out of whack in the economy. And as our sources point out, it's notoriously difficult for policymakers to deal with because the usual tools they might use to fight inflation can actually make unemployment worse, and vice versa. It's like a catch-22.
So prices are going up, people are losing their jobs, the economy isn't growing. A real mess.
Yeah, a real headache for everyone involved.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something we all interact with every day.
Yeah.
Money.
Sure.
We use it all the time. But what is it really in the context of macroeconomics? It's more than just the physical bills and coins, right?
It absolutely is. Money is like the lifeblood of a modern economy. And it does way more than just sit in our wallets or get spent at the store. It has three really crucial functions. First, it's a medium of exchange. What that means is it's universally accepted as payment for goods and services. So instead of having to barter, like trading a chicken for a pair of shoes, which would be incredibly inefficient, we have money that makes those transactions smooth and easy.
Can you imagine trying to, trade your old phone for a week's worth of groceries?
A nightmare, right?
That would not be fun.
No. So money solves that problem. It's a common denominator that we all agree on. Second, money acts as a unit of account. It gives us a way to measure and compare the value of different things. That allows us to make informed decisions about what to buy, how much to spend, and it helps us keep track of all those financial transactions. And third, money is a store of value. Ideally, it should hold its purchasing power over time. So if you save your money, you can use it later and it'll still be worth something.
Yeah.
And without these three basic functions, as our sources really emphasize, complex economies just wouldn't be able to function. We'd be back to bartering and things would get really chaotic really quickly.
Right. So money really is the grease that keeps the economic engine running smoothly.
Yeah.
And at the heart of all this money management, we have banks.
Mm-hmm.
What's their big role in this whole macroeconomic picture?
Banks are key players, absolutely. Their main job is to accept deposits from individuals and businesses, provide loans, which allow people to invest and spend, and basically keep that flow of money moving through the economy.
Okay.
But they do even more than that. They have a really significant role in managing the money supply and credit conditions. They do this by setting interest rates, among other things, which then affects inflation and overall economic activity.
Okay. So when we hear about the central bank adjusting interest rates, that's one of the main ways they try to, steer the economic ship.
Precisely. They can make borrowing more expensive by raising interest rates. And that can cool down an economy that's overheating, where inflation is becoming a problem. Or they can lower rates to encourage borrowing and spending if the economy is slowing down.
So they're constantly sort of adjusting and trying to find that sweet spot.
Trying to find that balance.
Yeah. Okay. Now, earlier we talked about economic growth being fueled by things like capital investment and technology. Where does that initial capital come from? It doesn't just appear out of thin air, right? That's where investment and these things called financial markets come into play.
Exactly. So financial markets, these are things like stock exchanges and bond markets. They act like this big matchmaking service, connecting people and institutions who have savings or capital to invest with businesses and governments that need funds.
Yeah.
Maybe those businesses want to expand their operations, develop new technologies, or maybe governments need to fund infrastructure projects like building roads and bridges. The financial markets help channel those funds to where they're needed.
So when I buy a share of stock in a company, I'm basically giving them money that they can use to grow, to innovate.
Exactly. You're giving them capital. And hopefully that leads to more economic activity, more jobs, all those good things.
Right. So financial markets are sort of like this crucial bridge that connect savers and investors with those who need capital to fuel growth and development.
Personally.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from the very basic definition of macroeconomics all the way through money, banking, financial markets. But I think it's important to step back and ask, for you, the person listening right now, why does any of this matter? Why should you care?
It's a great question. I think sometimes macroeconomics can feel very distant and theoretical, like it's just something that economists worry about. But the truth is, it has a very real impact on everyone's life.
Yeah.
So think about your career prospects. A strong, growing economy typically means more job opportunities, more security. It also affects the prices you pay for everyday things, from gas to groceries. That's all driven by inflation. And interest rates on your mortgage, your car loan, even your savings accounts. These are all shaped by macroeconomic forces and government policies. And then, your income, your taxes, the social safety nets that are in place, all of these are intertwined with the overall health and performance of the economy.
Right. And our sources gave some really concrete examples, too, like how in a booming economy, you might see your salary increase.
Absolutely.
But on the flip side, if there's a lot of inflation, the cost of food can really start to eat into your budget. These aren't just abstract concepts. They really hit us where it hurts.
Exactly. Understanding these macroeconomic forces can help you make bigger decisions in your own life. Everything from your career choices and your investments to how you manage your personal finances. It also makes you a more informed citizen. You can better understand what's happening in the news, the policy debates around economic issues. You're just more engaged with the world around you.
So it's not just for those economists sitting in their ivory towers.
No, not at all. It's something that affects all of us every day. It's the framework that shapes our economic reality.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into macroeconomics, we've talked about growth, inflation, money, banking, all these interconnected pieces. What's the one big takeaway you want our listener to remember?
I think the most important thing to understand is that all these concepts, they're all connected. They're not isolated ideas. They're all part of this complex system where one action can have ripple effects throughout the entire economy. Pulling one lever over here can have a completely unexpected consequence over there. Recognizing that web of relationships, that interconnectedness, that's the key to understanding how the big picture works.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that we're all part of this larger economic ecosystem. Well, thanks for walking us through all of this. I know it was a lot to cover, but hopefully our listener now has a better understanding of how this whole macroeconomic world works and, maybe even sparked a bit of curiosity to learn even more.
Exactly. Always more to learn.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode.
Until next time.
Until next time.